Llawn, cyn i ddechrau, dwi jyst eisiau nodi ychydig o bwyntiau. Mae cyfarfod llawn y Cynhelir drwy gynadledd fideo'n unol y rheolau sefydlog Senedd Cymru yn gyfystyr y nhrafodion y Senedd at ddibenion deddf Llywodraeth Cymru 2006. Bydd rhai o ddarpariaethau rheol sefydlog 34 yn gymwys ar gyfer y cyfarfod llawn heddiw mae'r hynny wedi nodi ar yr agenda. A dwi eisiau atgoffa aelodau fod y rheolau sefydlog sy'n ymwneud â threfn yn y cyfarfodydd llawn yn berthnasol i'r cyfarfod yma ac yr un mor berthnasol i'r aelodau sydd yn y siambr ac i'r rhai sydd yn ymuno drwy gyswllt fideo. Ac felly dyma ni'n cyrraedd eitem gyntaf yn agenda ni'r prynawn yma sef y cwestiynau i'r Prif Weinidog ac mae'r cwestiwn cyntaf gan Angela Burns.
Diolch, Hawdd. Good afternoon, First Minister. Will you outline the process by which sites are selected to temporarily accommodate refugees waiting for their asylum cases to be heard?
Llywydd, the Welsh Government has no responsibility for the process to which the member refers. The present Home Office makes such selections without reference to local or devolved democratic authorities.
Thank you for that, First Minister. We all know that the flow of people seeking asylum is building, and I understand that the Home Office, whilst facing a deluge, needed to act quickly. But in my view, mistakes have been made, and communication from the Home Office was very late in the day and very poor. I've put my concerns in a very detailed letter to the Home Secretary and to members of the Home Office. I am concerned that West Wales is not well suited to be a reception centre for asylum seekers to be processed, simply because we no longer, or we do not at the moment, have the infrastructure, capacity and capability to process people in a way that is fitting, dignified and respectful to them. And we are wanting that support. I've asked the Home Office for money, for additional human resource, and I wonder, First Minister, what the Welsh Government may be able to do. Unfortunately, we saw some shocking scenes last night at Penally Camp of elements coming in from away, not Pembrokeshire people. Pembrokeshire people are warm and welcoming, and we want to do our best by these people who've already been through a really traumatic time. But if you look at the video, which you can find on the Pembrokeshire Herald website, absolutely shocking scenes occurred with people busting from outside with very unpleasant political agendas. First Minister, what are you able to do as the Welsh Government to either help put pressure onto the Home Office to give the financial and human resource that our local services need to provide the right support for these people, and to aid our police, our hard-pressed local policing units, to ensure that disorder does not break out and people are not threatened no matter which side of that camp they're in?
Well, so I thank Angela Burns for those important questions. I share many of her concerns. A military camp is not a suitable place to house people who have fled from conflict and war in other parts of the world. I wrote to the Home Secretary on Friday of last week. I received a reply on Monday, so it was a very swift reply. It wasn't from the Home Secretary, though, just from a junior minister in the department. In my letter, I asked very specifically for a 2-week delay in the plan to house asylum seekers in Penally in order that proper planning and proper services could be put in place. And I don't think anybody could argue that that has been done in a satisfactory way. Unfortunately, the reply declined that request. I asked in my letter to the Home Secretary for specific assurances that funding would be provided to the local authority and to the local health board. We're talking about relatively small rural authorities who have no capacity to deal from their own resources with the demands that will now be placed upon them. Here was the reply. The Home Office will not provide additional funding in connection with any of the accommodation that is provided for asylum seekers. So an absolute blanket refusal to provide any additional funds either for Pembrokeshire Council or for Hywel Health Board. The letter went on to say that work on an agreed communications plan is in progress. Well, really, that is nonsensical, isn't it? Communication plan is in progress when there are hundreds of people protesting already in Tenby over the weekend, and the ugly scenes that the member referred to yesterday, the Home Office did not put out a single line to reassure the local population, to explain why they are doing what they are doing. Now, I want to endorse very much what Angela Burns said. Wales is a nation of sanctuary. When there are people who, through no decision of their own, arrive in Wales, then we want to make sure that they are well looked after and welcomed. The way in which the Home Office has gone about its decision in relation to Penally makes all of that far more difficult than it needed to have been. And while we will take part in any of the conversations and any of the groups that are set up to try to improve the position, the general approach needs rapidly to improve in order to avoid the repetition of the scenes that we saw last night, and to make sure that the people who will be housed in that camp are able to be properly looked after, and the concerns, the legitimate concerns of that local community that deserve to be properly addressed, can be communicated to them, and to draw them into the process rather than them simply being spectators of it.
Mary Jones.
Llywydd, and can I begin by thanking the First Minister in his response to Angela Burns, to reiterating the point that Wales is a nation of sanctuary, and we want to make people welcome, and we want to make sure that they receive the support that they need. I was, Llywydd, shocked by what the First Minister said about the Home Office's response, and it is quite unusual for me to be shocked by the way this Westminster government conducts itself, but this is particularly serious. These are very vulnerable people who have seen and been through horrible experiences, and the fact that they then find themselves at the receiving end of unpleasant behaviour when they get here is heartbreaking. I would agree with Angela Burns, and as the First Minister has already said, those people causing trouble in Penally last night were not typical of the Pembrokeshire community. Much more typical of the Pembrokeshire community were the people celebrating and welcoming asylum seekers on the beach at Tenby at the weekend, and it was very good to see them there. I fully appreciate that it is not the First Minister's responsibility to make provision for our new neighbours in Penally, but I'm sure that he will agree with me, and he said himself, that there will be pressures on local services. In the face of what appears to be a completely obdurate position from the UK government on this, is there anything further that the Welsh Government can do to discuss with local service providers what additional support they may need? I'm fully accepting that it should be the Home Office's job to provide it, but if that isn't possible, will the First Minister be able to work with local services to try and allay some of the fears and concerns that local people may have about pressures on services, and to make sure that these asylum seekers are welcome here in our country?
Well, Llywydd, thank Cynhelir Jones for those points. Yes, of course, the Welsh Government will work alongside both the local authority, the local health board and the local police service in the difficult job they now need to do, and where we're able to mobilise assistance on their behalf, where we're able to make cases on their behalf, then of course we will be very keen to do that. Our understanding of the Home Office's plan is that the people who will be housed at the camp will in time be dispersed to the 4 main dispersal areas across Wales, that they will live in Cardiff, Newport, Swansea and Wrexham. So our wish to welcome them to Wales is a long-term commitment to those people's welfare and well-being, and we want to make sure that that can be properly discharged. I think one of the most disturbing features of the whole episode is the way the Home Office's handling of it has led to Tenby becoming a target for hard right extremist groups from right across the United Kingdom, who've heard about this and who think that this is a cause that they can latch onto and exploit. Those people are not welcome in Wales, and I hope that we will soon be in a position to make sure that the police take the action that is necessary to make sure that they cannot inflame local sentiments, and that they understand that their presence in Wales is not one that is welcome by us.
Neil Hamilton. You're mute, Neil Hamilton. You're muted.
Diolch, Llywydd. Isn't it the truth of the matter that none of the people who are going to be housed at Penally is likely to be qualified for asylum in this country because they've come from a safe country in France, because they've all, as I understand it, arrived on small boats on the shores of Kent. 81% of those who have arrived in 2020 on the shores of Kent have been said by the Home Office to have no credible claim to asylum, although only 2% have actually been removed. So isn't the cause of the problem that we've got today, first of all, incompetence on the part of the British government, because they've completely lost control of our borders, but secondly, irresponsibility on the part of the Welsh government for its piece of virtue signalling in calling Wales a nation of sanctuary, because ultimately, if race relations are to be preserved in this country, it's got to be on the basis of managed and controlled migration and genuine asylum claims, and not bogus ones.
Well, Llywydd, we hear echoes of the members' long history in support of apartheid South Africa in the remarks he's made this afternoon. To describe Wales' ambition to be a nation of sanctuary as irresponsible simply beggars belief. I'm shocked to hear it even from him. And he has no knowledge whatsoever of where people who will be housed at this camp are coming from. None of us do. Almost all of them are yet to arrive. So, as ever, it is his bogus claims, his attempt to exploit the situation, to peddle a line that he finds political convenient that we've heard this afternoon. It's disgraceful.
Cwestiwn 2, Russell George.
Diolch, Llywydd. How has cross-border public transport been affected during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Llywydd, public transport in cross-border areas has been affected in the same ways as such services more generally. I know members in the Chamber will want to pay tribute to those operators and public transport workers who have done so much to maintain a core network of services during this crisis.
Thank you, First Minister, for your reply. Both the Welsh Government and Transport for Wales have rightfully said that no child should be left behind or has to change the pattern of their important return to education. We do have a situation where Transport for Wales have made a number of changes to the Aberystwyth to Shrewsbury service, and the effects have meant that students in Montgomeryshire have had their travel to Shrewsbury disrupted for education purposes. In fairness to Transport for Wales, they put a number of bus services on, but often those are not viable because there's extended journey times, and often the buses arrive after the beginning of courses. Now, as I understand it, the cancellation seems to be in regards to concern over staff safety of some of those services. This does continue to be quite distressing for younger people, and I'm sure you will agree with me that it's an anxious time for young people as they return back to school and college. I'd be grateful if you could discuss this situation with your colleagues and see how Transport for Wales can indeed be supported by the government in order to reinstate some of these services for younger people to get for their education in Shrewsbury.
So I thank Russell George for raising these points, and I know of his previous concerns about them. I think members will be reassured to know that Transport for Wales has reinstated the 6:29 service in the morning from Aberystwyth to Shrewsbury. It was reinstated on the 14th of September. But Llywydd, of course, will be aware of that. That is the key train service to take young people for education into Shrewsbury. Now, it is true, as Russell George has said, that train service is sometimes filled to a point where it is not safe to allow further passengers onto the route. And in those circumstances, Transport for Wales has extra bus capacity on standby should it be needed. Now, of course, Russell George is right that at the furthest point, that bus journey does take 45 minutes longer than the train journey would. That excess is reduced the closer young people get to Shrewsbury. But in the current circumstances, where coronavirus remains, as we've heard yesterday and today, on the rise, then making sure that trains are not overcrowded and young people and other passengers put at risk is very important, and that extra bus capacity, which is there every day should it be needed, is, I think, at the moment a proportionate way to making sure, as we would all wish to see, that no young person is unable to access the education that is so important to them.
Rhiannon Passmore.
Diolch, Llywyd. First Minister, prior to this morning, it had been many months before the Prime Minister of the UK has called a COBRA meeting with the devolved leaders across the United Kingdom's family of nations. Would issues of cross-border transport during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as on many other matters, be far better served by regular and routine communication between the relevant governments in England and Wales? How can the Welsh Government continue to encourage the UK Government that it is good to talk?
The member for that. I was very glad that there was a COBRA meeting today. I was glad to have a telephone call with the Prime Minister yesterday. The point I made to him then, and again in the COBRA meeting today, is that we need a regular and reliable pattern of engagement between the four nations of the United Kingdom. Ad hoc, last-minute, paperless meetings are not sufficient for us to be able to respond to the crisis as it is continuing to develop. I was reassured that the Prime Minister said in the COBRA meeting that they would now be properly reinstated. That will give us all an opportunity to discuss matters. Public transport was raised briefly, as Rhiannon Passmore has suggested during today's COBRA meeting. A regular, reliable rhythm of meetings in which we all know when we will have opportunities to share information, to look at the latest analysis, to pool ideas, and then to make decisions that are right for the different nations of the United Kingdom, I think is at the centre of the way that we can get through all of this in the best possible way together.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau, arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
Diolch, Llywydd. Could the First Minister present to the Senedd the government's proposals in terms of the changes to coronavirus restrictions, as the Prime Minister has just done as regards England in the last hour, and the First Minister of Scotland is shortly to do in the Scottish Parliament. And in doing so, could he say whether he agrees with what the opposition parties in Westminster have been saying, that while the UK Health Minister has emphasised a lack of public adherence to the rules in getting us to this point, it's also true that there have been some policy mistakes which have contributed to getting to this position, which begs two questions, really. What has gone wrong that needs to be put right? What are the lessons that we've learned? And what's the government's vision and plan in terms of the next 6 months? Is it a succession of releasing restrictions and then reimposing them and doing it again? And if so, we should be honest about that. If it isn't, then how can we use this phase to build up the resilience so that we don't have a third and fourth period of lockdown? Well,
so thank Adam Price for that. I caught some of what the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons, but not quite all of it. I think it's important to remind colleagues that we start in a very different place in Wales. Our approach to unlocking coronavirus restrictions has been at a different pace and in a different way to that across our border. Many of the things that the Prime Minister is talking about doing today, we have already done in Wales. So in the part of his statement that I heard, he was talking about encouraging people again to work from home. Well, we have never, ever in Wales suggested anything else than that. We have never gone down the line of saying that people should get back on the bus and get back into work. Our advice has always been, if you can work successfully from home, that is what you should do. We will reinforce that message today, but the message in Wales has never changed. I heard the Prime Minister say that matters that are in guidelines in England are going to be put in regulations. Well, we've always made greater use of regulations here. Very early on, we put the 2-metre distance in the workplace into our regulations. It's not been in guidance in Wales. It's been a legal obligation on employers, and that's made a difference. When we publish guidance to the hospitality industry, then our regulations require that the person in charge of such a setting has due regard for that guidance. So we've already done that differently. The Prime Minister is going to tighten the rule of 6. Well, our rule of 6 has been tighter all along. You can only meet somebody from your extended household, not 6 people from any old household who could meet indoors. And I heard him say that he was going to halt pilots in the arts and sports world. Well, reluctantly, we halted our pilots 10 days ago. We had 3 successful pilots. We were hoping that in this 3 weeks we could have done more. We decided 10 days ago that things were too difficult for us to be able to do that. So we start in a different place. There are things that we will be considering during the day. We will be talking with our colleagues in local government, in the health service, in public health and in the police about the additional measures that we might be able to take. But we will do it as ever with our partners. We will plan and then we will make an announcement. I think there, across Wales, Llywydd, I think the majority of people continue to very carefully and very scrupulously observe the rules. They want to do the right thing and they want to know what the right thing is to do. There is a small minority of people who somehow took the message for the summer when we were reducing restrictions that coronavirus was over. Those are the people we have to convince that they need to go back to observing all the things that they were doing earlier in the summer, and that will mean that the effort across Wales will be strengthened again. That will be my message to people in Wales today. I agree with what Adam Price said. This does not have to be the pattern for the future. But if it's not to be, that depends crucially not simply on what government does, but on what every citizen in their own lives do in order to make that collective effort that I think has been characteristic of the response in Wales.
Can I ask the First Minister that when the government has made a decision in terms of any changes that it's going to introduce, that it does bring a statement to the Senedd later this afternoon. We've always supported as decentralised as possible an approach. It may be, of course, that you can reach a point where that is no longer possible. You need to introduce nationwide changes. But could I ask the First Minister to look at the principle of localisation because of the range of situations we see across Wales, and possibly look at reversing the logic, if you like, having an overarching national policy as a default, but then having COVID-free areas and areas of low community transition which would be exempt from those nationwide changes. This would serve 2 purposes. It would incentivise continued adherence to the rules in areas of low transmission and increase adherence to the rules in areas of higher transmission. What consideration have you also given to the idea of a UK-wide ban on international travel during this critical period, a ban on non-essential travel from lockdown areas in the rest of the UK into Wales, and the temporary closure of pubs indoors, supported vitally, of course, by sector-specific financial support?
Well, so I think Adam Price puts his finger on one of the central dilemmas that we face in Wales. Because while we have a very difficult situation in a number of local authorities in the South East Wales corner, today in other parts of Wales, in 10 local authorities in Wales today, the rate of coronavirus was still falling. And I've so far not been convinced that we should treat Ceredigion as though it were Cynhelir, because the prevalence of coronavirus in Ceredigion is still at a very low ebb indeed, and it would not be proportionate to place the same level of restrictions on citizens there as we have had to ask people in Cynhelir to observe. So a blended approach in which we have some important national messages. The work from home message is a national message. The meeting 6 people indoors from your extended household is a national rule here in Wales. I will want to say something later today about trying to encourage people in Wales only to make those journeys that are really necessary. In Cynhelir and the other local authorities where local lockdown measures are concerned, you can't leave the county borough without a good reason for doing so. But beyond that, I think every one of us should be asking ourselves, is that journey really essential? Because the fewer people you meet and the fewer journeys you make, the less danger you are posing to yourself and others. So I think that as a message to people everywhere about minimising travel and staying close to home as much as you are able to is another brick in a national wall that we can build. After that, I'm still of the same mind as Adam Price suggested, that local measures for local circumstances at this point in the virus remain the right response in Wales.
Yes, and that will be the subject of a full statement later this afternoon, First Minister.
I can't, I don't want to promise that a statement can be made later this afternoon. The Health Minister will be making a statement. If the discussions with the authorities that we need to reach a conclusion on matters are not concluded today, we will take the earliest chance we can to make a statement.
Just very briefly on resilience and testing. I know we've talked about this before. In terms of the lighthouse labs, obviously building up our own capacity is absolutely critical. Interesting experiment in the northeast of England where they've taken a lighthouse lab effectively into public ownership, I suppose you might call it. And also they're targeting it, local authorities and the universities and local private sector working together. Interesting model. Could that be applied in Newport and then connected with our own indigenous system? And ventilators was a key theme in the early phase of the coronavirus. Ventilation is becoming mission critical as well. Are we going to be providing help for workplaces, public buildings to get better ventilation during this critical phase?
So we had a presentation at Cobra this morning from Dido Harding, the person who is in charge of the testing regime in England. I'm afraid it is going to be a number of weeks, from what I heard, before the Lighthouse Lab system is back up to the level of performance that we saw only a few weeks ago. In the meantime, there are some local experiments of the sort that Adam Price referred to being undertaken, and we will certainly look to see whether any of that flexibility could be applied in Wales. And yes, ventilation, it will be an increasingly important theme as we go into the winter months, where people will be indoors more and where those non-medical interventions that can help to prevent the spread of the disease will be even more important, and the Welsh Government will certainly be emphasising that in the guidance we continue to provide to public authorities and to private businesses.
Ar ran grŵp y ceidwadwyr, Susie Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, on the weekend you said that you needed to earn the trust of voters again ahead of the election. Why do you think you've lost voters' trust?
Well, voters' trust have clearly not been lost in Wales. If the member troubled to look at any of the surveys that are showing the levels of trust in the Welsh Government during this pandemic are at extraordinarily high levels. 75% and above in the Welsh Government, 45% in the government that her party runs in Westminster. The point I made, Llywydd, is this. Any party in government has to earn and re-earn trust at any election. For 5 elections in a row, the Labour Party has earned the trust of people in Wales, and we take nothing of that for granted. We will work as hard as we can to go on earning that trust. I imagine any party that seeks the votes of Welsh electors tries to make sure that they are trusted by them. There's nothing unusual in what I said. I imagine it refers to much to her party as to any other.
Oh, it's a shame such a defensive response to that one. It might have given you the opportunity perhaps in the chamber today to say some of the things that you claim as achievements. I mean, certainly I would have appreciated an answer which would have included perhaps, I don't know, the Labour member for Bridgend remembering to take his mask to a shop in accordance with Welsh Government's own rules. But I think there are some more serious issues which you could have addressed in your answer today, Minister, because last week you let it be known that there was an 11-day gap between you finding out about a major leak of 18,000 pieces of personal information and the period when your health minister knew about them. It's the 3rd time there have been problems with personal data on your watch during this pandemic that we know of. Do you see, or foresee, I should say, a difficulty in keeping this pandemic under control if people don't trust you with their personal data?
Well, Llywydd, people do trust the system we have in Wales with their personal data. It's why the system we have in Wales is so much more successful than the system across our border. The data breach was regrettable. It was dealt with by the body which is responsible for it, which is the data controller in that instance. I've asked today to be told that a very small number of people who may have been affected have actually contacted Public Health Wales with any concerns. Those concerns will be dealt with. I don't think the matter is of such significance that it needs rehearsing in this forum 2 weeks in a row. And I think there are bigger issues that the Conservative Party might have wanted to discuss, but probably are afraid to do so.
Well, First Minister, that didn't sound to me like an explanation of what that 11-day gap was all about. And there's no point saying that this is all down to Public Health Wales when we've had data issues 3 times in a row now. I mean, once, obviously, that would be misfortune, twice would be carelessness, but the 3rd time suggests to me we've got a Welsh Government here that's not that keen on taking responsibility for something that has really shocked a lot of people here. We are relying on track and trace to be the answer to keeping this pandemic under control and to avoid the kind of national lockdowns that Adam Price was hopefully trying to avoid as well yesterday when he spoke earlier on. On the issue of trust, though, there is something pretty serious I think we need to discuss here today, as you've invited me to do that. And yesterday, in an interview on ITV Wales Sharp End, the Health Minister said that he would not rule it out for making it compulsory for people to have a COVID-19 vaccine if and when one becomes available. Now, that's compulsory vaccines, First Minister. Did you know that he was going to say this, or was that another piece of information that the Health Minister has kept from you? And what is there in such a statement? I mean, it's a completely Orwellian statement, a real attack on personal freedoms, which makes you think that anyone should dare trust a future Labour government?
Well, on the matter of trust that the member seems so exercised about this afternoon, of the 440 positive cases that were eligible for follow-up in the TTP system in the most recent period, 96% were reached, and they provided details of their recent contacts. That says to me that our system is very well trusted and very well regarded, and 89% of all those contacts were also successfully contacted and were able to have their cases resolved. We have very high levels of trust in the Welsh system, and anything that she says to the contrary is simply not borne out by the facts. The Health Minister was asked a hypothetical question. Would he rule something out? He simply said that he wouldn't. He didn't, it went no further than that. There's no implication what he said that he had made a decision of any sort. And in this context, in the context of coronavirus, when so much is unknown and where the stakes are so high, to have ruled out something at this stage, I think would not have been a responsible thing to have done. And I think he was absolutely right in the answer that he gave.
Arweinydd Grŵp Brexit, Mark Drakeford.
First Minister, I'm astonished by that answer in respect to your Health Minister having said yesterday that you had the power to mandate vaccination, suggesting that people in Wales might be forcibly injected with a COVID vaccine. Is that what devolution has come to? Surely such a programme of forced injections would break international law, or is that only a concern when you want to impede Brexit? Wouldn't it also break domestic law, which states that Section 45E of the Control of Disease Act 1984, as amended by the Coronavirus Act, that regulations may not include provision requiring a person to undergo medical treatment. Medical treatment includes vaccination. First Minister, as with Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, you exonerated your Health Minister from breaching guidance when he had his family picnic in Cardiff Bay. Have you similarly exonerated him now for publishing the address and date of birth of everyone who tested positive for COVID in Wales because it wasn't significant, even though the rules required disclosure of such a data breach to the Information Commissioner within 72 hours? Will he now stay in place despite saying your government could mandate vaccination in breach of UK and international law?
So there is no such programme. There never has been such a programme. There is no proposal to have such a programme. It's just a got-up job. He knows it is, but he wants to appeal to a certain sort of person in the population, and so he makes up such charges on the floor of the National Assembly. Let me tell him again, in case he wants to ask me again, there is no such programme. There never has been such a programme. There is no proposal for a programme. And people who want to pretend that there is are doing it entirely for their own political advantage and nothing else.
Minister, I could easily say the same to you in respect of what you've said about the Internal Markets Bill and what you say would be a breach of the law and international law from the Prime Minister. Your Health Minister said yesterday that he should keep open the option of forcibly vaccinating people with a COVID vaccine in Wales. You said just now that he was right to keep that option open, despite the fact that it is against the law. Could you clarify the position on shielding? You previously told old and vulnerable people to maintain shielding through to the 16th of August, even though by then virus prevalence had been low for some weeks. Will it not now be more difficult for them to shield again, having only so recently come out of such a long period of confinement? Would not older and vulnerable people be at less risk from COVID now, as in Sweden, if more younger people had already been through it, rather than having postponed infections through lockdown?
I see the question swerved to something completely different at the end of it. No international law has been broken. No law of any sort has been broken, because there is no proposal of any sort that would lead to that eventuality. When I criticise the UK government for its deliberate intention to breach international law, I'm not just doing that by myself. I commend the member to read Theresa May's speech in the House of Commons yesterday, a speech in which she said that the UK government are putting the integrity of the United Kingdom at risk, a speech in which he said that this is a Conservative government willing to go back on its word, to break an international agreement signed in good faith and to break international law. That's not me. That is the previous Conservative Prime Minister of this country, supported by the two previous Conservative Prime Ministers in their turn. This is not some idiosyncratic view of the Welsh Government. It's a view widely shared in the party which has proposed it. As to the shielding population, I note again what he says about Sweden. In Sweden, 10 times more people have died than in Norway, its immediate neighbour. Imagine a situation here. Imagine what the member would be saying to me if Wales had pursued a policy that led to 10 times the number of citizens in Wales dying compared to the number across our border. Would he be standing up here advocating it then? Of course he wouldn't be.
Cwestiwn 3, Nick Ramsey.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the opening of the Grange University Hospital?
Thank the member for that question. So the announcement that the Grange Hospital will open in mid-November instead of the original planned date in March 2021 is very welcome. In the coronavirus context, it will provide critical care and acute respiratory care to 600,000 people in the Aneurin Bevan University Health Board area.
Thank you, First Minister, for that answer. I'm sure you'd like to join me in thanking the construction workers who've helped keep this important project on time and on budget over the last few months and years, particularly at a time when the sector's been so badly affected by the pandemic, with construction micro-businesses making up around a third of applications to the Economic Resilience Fund. You've just touched on the hospital's role in the COVID-19 pandemic. What discussions, or could you say a little bit more about any discussions that your officials have had with the local health board about a strategy of using the hospital for COVID cases and therefore removing the risk of infection from the other general hospitals in the Gwent area? And also, is the Welsh Government looking at transport links to the new hospital? I have raised this before, as there are concerns about connectivity. The A4042 through Monmouthshire badly needs upgrading, and there's also certainly a need for better public transport links for patients and for families to and from the new hospital.
Sorry to thank Nick Ramsey for those points. I absolutely do associate myself with what he said about construction workers. Here is a major project, a £360 million project delivered on budget and ahead of time, and that really is a tribute to those who planned it and then who have executed the plans for the hospital. And it very much is part of an Iron Bevan University Health Board's plan for dealing with those people who fall acutely ill and will need urgent respiratory care in response to coronavirus. So the Grange Hospital will be pivotal over the months during the winter, when those sorts of services may be even more necessary than they have been in the spring and summer period. I thank the member for what he asked about public transport, and I know he's raised this in a recent article in the South Wales Argus. The University Health Board confirmed to me yesterday that there will be a public bus service to the site when the hospital is open in November. Buses will drop off at a dedicated point on the site. There are bus services that will link Newport, Caerleon, Cwmbran and the site itself, and there are further discussions going on to confirm all those services, but the Health Board is determined that public transport to the site will be there from the time the hospital opens and will be available to those who need to use it. The member has asked me previously about the state of the 4042. I know he will be aware of the actions that have been taken to improve drainage along the road in recent times, and there is some evidence that those investments are paying a dividend, and that some of the interruptions to the road, particularly through flooding in recent years, may now have been resolved through the schemes that have been put in place and the improvements that have been made on adjacent third-party land.
Cwestiwn 4, Jenny Rathbone.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's strategy to prioritise a green recovery?
Thank the member for that. Llywydd, the green recovery is at the heart of our response to the coronavirus pandemic. It will improve outcomes for Wales, generate a more sustainable and resilient economy for the future, tackle the climate emergency and address declines in biodiversity.
First Minister, the OECD report that was published recently really highlights the importance of high-performing transport networks and skills development to address the historic low productivity that we've suffered in Wales, given the very low level of investment by the UK government since deindustrialisation in the 70s and 80s. It is very disappointing to read that the UK government seems hell-bent on using the Internal Markets Bill to undermine the climate reduction commitments of devolved governments. How can the Welsh Government stay focused on the precision skills required to deliver its clean, green, transport and housing ambitions essential to deliver our carbon reduction commitments when the UK government seems determined to top-slice the money that Wales is entitled to build redundant relief roads and, I fear, carpet the countryside with poor-quality building developments to become the slums of the future?
Llywydd, thanks Jenny Rathbone for that very important supplementary question. I was very glad that the Welsh Government was able to commission from the OECD an independent report drawing on best international evidence to help us with the important job of designing future policies and future structures for regional economic development. The report does absolutely put focus on skill development. It's really important that we are able to invest in the people that we have here in Wales so that they are ready to be able to take advantage of employment opportunities when they come. The member, Llywydd, raises, I think, an extraordinary possibility. When I first saw the Internal Market Bill, that was bad enough when I thought that what the UK government was planning was to take all the money that had come to Wales from European sources and hug it to itself and eke it back out according to ideas that they may have, rather than the ideas that people in Wales may have for what is necessary here. But the idea that they would seek to top-slice budgets that are available to this Senedd to deploy in the way that we choose in order to run schemes of their own is, I think, an idea even beyond what we originally thought they may have in mind. To do so would make a mockery of the words that the Prime Minister uses about respecting devolution and being a devolutionist himself. Let us hope that there is a UK Government Minister who is willing to put on record the fact that they intend no such thing.
Question 5, John Griffiths.
How will the Welsh Government adapt its response to COVID-19, given the experience of the virus to date?
Thank John Griffiths for that question. So the Coronavirus Control Plan published in August and last week's Winter Protection Plan are both rooted in the lessons we have learned during the coronavirus crisis. Adapted responses can be seen, for example, in more effective treatments for the disease and in COVID-specific rehabilitation measures.
First Minister, from 6 o'clock this evening, there will be further restrictions in Newport and other local authorities. The length of time involved will depend on the incidence of cases, but are you able to say anything more about how long these measures may be in place? And an increasing number of school pupils are self-isolating, further damaging their education after the loss of school time in the last academic year. Might Welsh Government then, First Minister, prioritise testing for pupils and staff to minimise loss of time in school and also ensure that learning at home is consistent and top quality across all our schools?
So I thank John Griffiths for those questions. The coronavirus restrictions in Newport will be reviewed within 2 weeks. My ambition is for those restrictions progressively to be lightened as soon as it is safe for us to do so. The contact tracing team in Newport, I think, have been absolutely outstanding in the way that they have responded to the flare-up of numbers in the city, and provided they continue to have the cooperation of local people, I think there is a realistic prospect that that outbreak will be brought back under control as rapidly as possible, and then some of the measures we've needed to put in place will be able to be removed. As to schools, Llywydd, since the 1st of September, there have been coronavirus cases in 275 schools in Wales. 140 students have been affected, 135 staff members have been affected. In 198 of those 275 schools, only 1 case has been reported. So in more than 7 out of 10 schools, it's a single isolated case that has been reported. So far, although I agree it is early days, those cases have been imported to the school by people who have contracted it for other reasons rather than being spread in the school environment. We will continue to prioritise the testing of students and teachers and other school staff members where that becomes necessary in order for us to minimise the risk of transmission and to respond to the final point that John Griffiths made about continuity of learning for young people who may still have to spend some of their time outside the classroom. In some parts of Wales, that was done fantastically well earlier in the summer. That learning is being applied now to make sure that those standards can be achieved in all parts of Wales.
Canola Joyce Watson, question 6.
Diolch, Llywydd. What assessment has the Welsh Government made of the findings of the OECD report, The Future of Regional Development and Public Investment in Wales?
Llywydd, the OECD's model of a more regional and place-based model of economic growth is already at the heart of our economic action plan and the goals we have set for future regional investment. We will consider the report's recommendations with stakeholders over the coming weeks.
Thank you for that. One of the findings in the report is the impact of the continued austerity inflicted on Wales by the UK government spending plans. And that austerity did reduce local authority investment in industries and other forms of money that we would have expected to have come to Wales, and it was purely a political decision. So what discussions have you had with the UK Chancellor to highlight the impact that their politically imposed austerity measures are having and will have on Wales if they carry on along that track? And will you ask Simon Hart, the Secretary of State for Wales, to start acting in the interest of Wales and respect the devolution settlement?
Well, very important points, Llywydd, made there by Joyce Watson. There's no doubt, is there, that the whole of the United Kingdom is less able to withstand the shocks of coronavirus and Brexit because of a decade of austerity. Household incomes, public services, private businesses, all undermined by the flawed and foolish policies pursued at that time. The budget of the Welsh Government is £4 billion lower today than it would have been had it simply stayed where it was 10 years ago, not an iota of growth. If we'd simply stayed in real terms where we were a decade ago, £4 billion more to invest in our public services and all the other urgent needs that we have here in Wales. We continue to take every opportunity we have with the Chancellor through the actions of my colleague Rebecca Evans to urge the UK Government to use the historic low interest rates that we have for an infrastructure boost to the UK and to the Welsh economy in the comprehensive spending review. On the 30th of June, Llywydd, the Prime Minister announced a new deal in infrastructure spending. For Wales, it was no deal because not a single penny came to us for this year for any infrastructure boost. So it would be very good if we had a Wales office that stood up for Wales, that was the voice of Wales in Westminster rather than the parrot of Westminster in Wales, and in that way we might be able to make some inroads into the difficulties and damage that has already been inflicted on us.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Yr eitem nesaf felly yw'r cwestiynau i'r Cwnsler